I put Lynn Rote's name up there before I knew she was coming. It's sincere. But certainly I've been able to talk with Lynn quite a few times in the past 10 years about some of the things that I'll say today, and Carl and Carla Coleman and Dawn Morales as well. If you like the things that I say, they're probably they're probably responsible for the things that you like, and if there's something you don't, I'm probably responsible. I spoke to Chad about doing this in June. After I got my spring 12 evaluations for this course for historical, and they were as high as any evaluations I've ever gotten. I've gotten some pretty high ones over the days. And I've made some changes that I was really pretty excited about that, and I wanted to share those. And so that's what this is about. I would like it to be as casual and informal. That is to say, please interrupt. Carl Forns, and I've had his name before, he said he couldn't come. Carl said, you know, whenever you get to a particularly important point, to imagine him in the back of the room smirking or rolling his eyes or something. But Carl certainly helped me a lot along the way. This is that's the lunar eclipse from 12/21/2010. And this is on the second page of the syllabus that you got. This is the objective for the class. My objective for the historical geology class is that you begin to understand the reasoning behind how we know what we know, or what we think we know, about Earth history and the history of life through time. We'll be interested in how different lines of evidence are assembled to construct models of Earth in the past, and what are the assumptions of these models. That's a big palette, or big canvas to hang on. And I didn't decide to add this until this morning, because it's important for you to know that that's what my objective for the class is before I start talking about what I did, because this was really central to it. And then another thing that I want, the next picture, that's the blue marble picture that you may, the NASA blue marble that you may have seen. I really like this quote. If the elucidation of Earth history and the origin and evolution of life on the globe are not of prime importance as ends in themselves, if the whence and the why and the whither are not supreme, then indeed has our lot fallen among evil days. I think, and you know, he said it a few days ago. And I think, I don't know if that's hyperbole or not, I don't think it is. I think to do this sort of class requires a terrific passion and enthusiasm for what you're doing. Because if you don't have it, there are too many opportunities to be discouraged. I mean, there are way too many opportunities to be discouraged, and you won't be able to carry through when it's important. So, if you saw the title of this, and you saw, I've been teaching this writing intensive way for a long time, since '93, a very long time. And why I did what I did at first was because this class is very concept. It's all about concepts, and it's important to know the series of facts that go with it. It's really important to know those facts. But concepts, for me, don't test very easily. My experience as a student and as a teacher with in-class essay tests was pretty grim. And I don't know a neat way to test concepts. So I said, after teaching a year or two, as a, with tests. I said, this is crazy, I've got to have them write something. And then the second thing, and you'll see why this is important in a minute, I didn't know as much paleontology as I would have liked. I could do the rocks all the way back for a very, very long time. But I didn't know, my background is not in paleontology, and you'll see something that I did to help myself get a more secure footing there. Why I did what I've done more recently, I wanted to increase the variety and quality of interactions of the student with me and the students with each other. And I think that's at the root of those improved SETs. Not that SETs, they're one particular measure of something. And then another thing that I did that was, if you don't know any geology, I won't teach you very much in this, but I'll show you something. I reorganized the class in a different way, I think, from the way it's taught almost everywhere else in the United States and probably everywhere else in the world, and I'll say something about that in a minute. What I did a long, long time ago, papers, first weekly, and I tried to look for a little emoticon that showed like little X's for eyes, because for a whole semester, I couldn't spell, I couldn't write a complete sentence. I thought it was reasonable to say students should be able to write 5 pages on something we learned that week. That seemed to me very reasonable. They were able to write, but it turns out if you have 20 students times 5 pages a week, that's over 100 pages a week, and that was crazy. I couldn't deal with it. Mike May's son was not enrolled in the class that year, but Greg O'Quinn, his colleague at DHEC today, was in that class, and Brad Reinhardt, who's our departmental administrator, now our departmental manager, was in that class. And it's hard for me to believe even now that I did 14 weeks of 20 students and 5 pages a week. That about killed me. I went to bi-weekly papers, seemed like 7 should be reasonable. From there, I went to one every 3 weeks, and I probably spent 2 or 3 years on each of these. And then what I do now, and what I've done probably for 3 years, has been basically 1 paper a month, and then an introductory paper that I'll explain to you more in a second. And if you say, as I imagine in 1993, if you say, show me that you've learned 1 thing a week, certainly you can show me you've mastered 1 thing in a month, right? That seems very reasonable to me. The other thing that I incorporated a very long time ago is we do some outside reading, and I'll say more about that in a minute. And students lead the discussions on that all the time in theory and 50% of the time in practice. And we do 6 of those in a semester, and I'll say more about that. What I've done recently, and you'll see my recently is probably different from yours, I began doing threaded discussions on Blackboard, probably beginning in 2003. I started scheduling this class so that we have lab from 8 to 10:40, 1 morning a week, and then from 10:50 to 12:05 is when our class is scheduled. So one day, our lab day, I had 4 hours to work with, and that allowed me to take some field trips that I couldn't do in 2 hours and 40 minutes. And it really, it allowed me to take them and show them and do some things that otherwise it would have been difficult to do. Invert the order of content in the syllabus. In geology, the way we understand anything geologically is by a principle called uniformitarianism that says the present is the key to the past, which is different from what historians say, right? Geologists say the present is the key to the past, that if you understand the processes that are active on Earth today and the rock products that are created by those processes, right? When we see those rock products in the past, we can infer the activity of those processes and have some idea what happened in the past, right? It's really not, the present is the key to the past. It's a pretty simple idea. The way every historical geology textbook is set up and the way every other historical geology class is set up is you spend some weeks doing introductory material or some number of lectures doing introductory material, and then you start back 4.5 billion years ago when things were very different from what they are today. There was no oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, there was no plate tectonics, there was no life. It was a very different world. And so to say, here's the organizing principle for our science, and then to start in a world that's completely alien to the students, induced moments of cognitive dissonance, right, among my clientele. And that was no good. And so what I said, why don't we start, we'll talk about the basic principles and the basic things that we see on Earth today. And then let's tell the story backwards. Let's start with the most recent chapters, and then we'll step backwards. And by the time we get to the Archean, by the time we get to the formation of the moon, by the time we get way, way, way back in time, you'll understand how we got there, and you'll be prepared to understand and discuss those things. I don't know how many books you've read or movies that you've watched that they start with the most recent scene and they go back. I can only think of one movie and I can only think of one book. But it's a hard way to tell a story. But I'll show you how I did it in just a minute. That was an important thing, and it freed me up to do other things in my class. In 2009, I also started, and Carla Coleman, I'm sure other people did it too, but it was something Carla Coleman taught me, is I meet with the students once a week regarding their papers. It's a short meeting, it's 15 minutes. But that increased the variety and certainly the quality of ways I was interacting with students, and it led to some very positive outcomes. In 2010, I started doing minimal marking, and if you haven't done it before, I'll say a little bit about it. That gave me a lot of liberty as well. And I introduced a rubric for my class. It's different from the one that's used for the writing portfolio, but it's the one that works for my class. Last year, 2011, I introduced a reflective journal. And then I'll say something about these objectives really quickly. This is something I learned from Dr. Priest a long, long time ago. Well, I won't even say that. My students said, how can we have a final exam? I'm on the last page. How can we have a final exam if we've never had any tests, right? And, every day I start every class by saying, are there questions from last time? And if they're not questions, I either give them a quiz that's based on questions from the last lecture, or I ask them, not with the formality of a quiz, what it is. But if you read this, it says, a student successfully completing historical geology will be able to, and their final is pretty well drawn from those questions. And as we complete these questions in class, over the course of our lectures, over the course of the semester, our lectures in our labs, I say, well, you can put 131 here, you can put 214 here. You can put, March 2nd here. They know where all this stuff is in their notes. And so we've stopped discussing now what's going to be on the final because they have all the questions for the final right now. Okay? And that gave me a lot of liberty too, to not discuss a lot of things that sometimes they wanted to discuss in class. Cell phones, if you came to Michelle Vieira's talk a month ago maybe now, I made a remark in there about cell phones. I hate cell phones. I mean, in class I did. In life, I love them. In class, I hate them. Because they're a distraction. Primarily, that they're a distraction to me. Secondarily, and the point I try to make with students, it's a distraction to other students in the room. One thing that really came out of the reflective journal, drawings are very important to me in my class. Drawings are a way that I organize the material to satisfy myself. It's how it's organized in my brain. My students, most of my students, couldn't draw a stick figure, couldn't draw an insect. If this is on tape, I'm sorry, but it's true. They couldn't draw anything. And it turns out every one of these phones, the cheapest phone, has a great camera on it. And so if I'm drawing something, and I post all the lectures and all that stuff on PowerPoint and those other things, ones that I do PowerPoint lectures for. There are plenty of times I draw something on the board. And you know what? They all have a pretty nice camera right now. And if they need to pull their camera out and take a picture of what's on the board before it gets erased, I mean, I'm a huge believer in if you've ever traveled, if you go someplace and you look at your pictures when you've traveled, right? And it's like, taking a picture of it is not the same as understanding it, right? You look at some of these pictures, what the hell was that? What was I thinking of when I took that picture, right? I'm sorry, that was not a public speaking type thing. It's not the same as drawing it for yourself. It's not the same as re-synthesizing that concept in your mind. But if you saw some of the pictures that I saw, they need a second cut. I mean, the time that it took me to draw on the board was not enough for them to get it. And so if they can take a picture with this and recapture it in the privacy of their own home, I think that's a great, great thing to do. And it turned out, like a lot of other things in this life, it was a problem for me. It wasn't a problem for them. Most of them know not to play with the toy when they're in the room. But if I say, you know what, you can use this as a tool to be more successful in my class, well, they like me a little better now, and there's the chance they might capture it better than the way I know they did in their notes. Somebody's waiting when I'm going to start talking about writing and pencil. What did I get rid of over the years? We used to have a faculty member here named Diana Rice, and she brought some guru from Indiana University here to talk to us about best practices related to something, science education. And one thing that he said, or at least I'm going to give him credit for right now, is if you require students to submit written work, that you should give them some examples to go by of what that written work looks like. And then he said something that's really super important. He said it's important that you just not give them good examples. You need to give them sorry examples too, because it's a little bit like reading an abnormal psychology book or what to expect when you're expecting something like that. He said, I do that, and I do that too, and I do that. By the time you've self-diagnosed that you have some condition, right? Well, that's not, it's important to have some bad examples too. So you say, oh, I do that. And so I redacted students' names, and I think all I took off was the name. Now, if I put their name in the comments at the end, I got rid of that. But I had a binder, and it was a collection of papers accumulated over, I don't know, 3 to 10 years, really. And it was arranged not by topic, but by, here are the A papers, here are the B papers, here are the C papers, here are the D papers, here are the papers. If you want to know how to fail, look at this paper. This paper will show you how to fail. And I had those with a sign-out sheet. They couldn't leave the building. The binder couldn't leave the building, but there were plenty of examples in there. It turns out, and this gets to the quality and the variety of experience, students didn't use the notebook. After the first 2 or 3 years, students didn't use the notebook. The reason they didn't use the notebook is that they would be sitting by themselves at a table just like this one, and they leaf through it, and there was no interaction in there. It was just them and this old graded paper, right? And there was no interaction in that, and they didn't do it. After the first 2 or 3 years, I kept leaving the notebook in the departmental office, and no one would check it out. What I tell the students is you need to demonstrate your mastery of one topic each month. And I give them, if you look on the syllabus, and there'll be one that pop up on the screen in a minute, but if you look at this italic number 2, italic number 3, italic number 4, italic number 5, they have their choice of topics to write their paper on. And surely you can, if somebody gives you a choice of 5 or 6 or 7 topics, there's something in a month that you can find that you're interested to do. The first paper I have them do is an introductory one, because it turned out our students, when I said science and they said science, we didn't have a common agreement what science was. They knew that they didn't like it, but we didn't have a common vocabulary of what science was. And so you got one, Dr. Grant? Yeah, good. Great. And so we had a long discussion one day, early, about science and science as both a method and an organized body of knowledge. And I give them this list of quotes that I compiled over a period of years. And I changed this first paper. And what I say to them now is I give them a few minutes to read it and think about these, and I say, choose one that you like and put a circle around it. And then I say, choose one that explains why you don't like science as well as you did when you were a younger student, when they were all interested in science, right? What is one that captures your problems with this material? And they look, and I say, now choose another one that shows something that another one that you like out of this list. And we talk for a few minutes about that, about those ones that we chose and how we happen to have chosen them. And I said, so, in your first paper assignment, use as a springboard, use that quote as a springboard, and give me some specific examples from your life. What is it that makes you feel this way about this? What is the reason? The one that you chose that if you don't like certainly speaks to a bad experience you had with science. Explain how that figures in. And I've gotten a much better paper about that. When I grade that paper, it's very hard for them not to get a perfect score on it. Because mostly I want to see where they're coming from and what their background and their experience is. Because they are, even more than years, there's such a range of their experiences and such a range in what their understanding of science is, that's a good introductory way. And it gets them starting to talk about it. Beginning, I guess that first paper was due this past spring on February 2nd. They're usually due on the Thursday, just above that italic line. That's when the paper topic is due. And I tell them, as you choose from these different topics, you can hop around and you can choose any sort of one that you want. Or, you know, I try to inspire them to say, you know, it can be the case that over the course of the semester, as your knowledge in this subject area grows, you can pursue a single train of thought, and by the time it's over, you can end up with close to 30 pages of increasingly sophisticated understanding of some topic. And you know, not many college students have written 30 pages tracing a single topic over the course of the semester. I said that's a real achievement. That's something to be proud of. Only a few of them have done that. They like to hop around a little bit more than that. But certainly they can do that. A big, I don't want to say problem, something I understood, and almost everyone in this room, I think, is of an age to understand this. The media, if I can say that, the media has changed how material is presented to people. And when I was a boy, or even when I was a teenager, generally there could be some agreement on what the facts of a situation were, and then there would be some interpretation. If you want to talk about a newspaper, you know, hopefully during the week you mostly got your news, and then maybe there's a column on Sunday, and here's somebody going to analyze that through some particular filter and interpret it for you. And now it seems to me that facts and interpretations are so conflated everywhere, whether it's print or video or on the radio. Facts and interpretations are mixed up all the time. And our students don't have the critical thinking skills, excuse me very much, to appreciate that. And so we have to, and they, as a result, in matters of science, they think everything's an opinion. They think that it's an opinion. They think evolution is an opinion that's the same as any other opinion, your opinion about which baseball team's better on what particular evening. That's a massive problem. And so I prepared another handout for them. It's, you know, usually people on this side of the room think I'm prejudiced, so I'll pass them out this way. You know, we spend a long time talking about the difference between facts or observations that everyone would agree on and interpretations, which is something else, right? You're welcome to have your interpretation, but everyone should agree on the facts. Everyone should agree on the observations before we start talking about the interpretations. Something that none of the people I credited at the beginning can accept blame for. I said, you know what? When you do this, when you write something for me, put in bold, use your word processor and put in bold what a fact or observation is. It shouldn't matter who's making the observation when you do that, right? Put that in bold. Those are things that everyone can agree on. And then interpretations, put those in italics. After you write it, put it in italics. And then you'll know in your own mind what are the facts and what are the interpretations, and it will be clear in your own mind what you're doing. The other thing I wrote on here said, underline and put in bold what your thesis statement for the whole paper is. And just because you start with that doesn't mean it's immutable somehow and it can't change, because we change them every week as we go along. And let's make sure that our thesis statement for each, or topic sentence, excuse me very much, of the successive paragraphs that support that thesis, did I say underline them? Something like that, for each of those paragraphs. And so you can see, well, clearly this paragraph is written in a way that it will support that thesis statement that I'm doing. This is a helpful discussion for us to have. This is a helpful discussion for us to have. They hate for me to pin them down, put in bold what the observations are, and put in italics what the interpretations are. To be forced to do that is an exercise they don't usually enjoy, but it's something that they have to do for this class. And if you remember the first or second slide that I showed you, if you have to understand what the lines of evidence are and what are the assumptions that underlie those lines of evidence. And it's been very helpful to me. There's some other things on that. We have a 15-minute meeting. And in the past, I've let students resubmit their paper if they didn't come to all 3 meetings. Those days are gone. I ain't going to do that anymore. We're having the meetings so you can turn in your best product. If you weren't able to turn in your best product, why are you resubmitting, right? I mean, welcome to life. So there's the syllabus. And just look, I think we've talked about most of this stuff along the way. We talked about concepts. We talked about reordering this thing. So my lectures, what it turns out after about 4 introductory lectures, I have 20 freestanding vignettes. Maybe it's dishonorable to call them vignettes. They're the panels that I have to speak to for the semester, and it's easy because they're freestanding. I can sort of substitute in and out as I would like. We talked about the scheduling, the block scheduling. We talked about the final. What do I do in the time that I used to test? We read really good books. We read 2 each semester. And generally I keep them for 2 or 3 years. There are a couple cases where our effort-benefit ratio has been pretty big, and I haven't felt any problem throwing that book away and moving on to the next one. Generally, they're not textbooks. Generally, they're not textbooks at all. In some cases, they're Pulitzer Prize-winning books or National Book Award books or Phi Beta Kappa books. They're all very well written. If 2 of these, and there are a couple that came up that I just didn't take a picture of here. We've read a lot of them.
You're saying you show this to your students?
No, we read them.
Use them, or you have the books right there, or you have a list?
They're reading them, and then they lead the discussion. Okay. You know, if you look,
they find them on their own?
No, I have a bookstore.
Okay.
Bookstore. That's our mercantile arm here. Every 2 or 3 weeks, I think, I wrote down here discussion 1, discussion 2, discussion 3, discussion 4. I schedule them in that big block that I've got with my lab already. The one, this, Dinosaurs, A Concise Natural History, that is a bona fide textbook. And textbooks are generally not the best written books that there are. This is a great written book. The students love this. I think we've read it 3 years now, and I'm going to use it again. Students love this book. And so they read 30 or 40 pages, maybe 70 pages in a class, over 2 or 3 weeks. And I how that's done, sort of on the far right-hand column of my syllabus. They're responsible for leading the discussion at least once in the class. This 1 hour discussion, they're responsible for leading the discussion once, and they're responsible for participating in other times. I assign those randomly, right? They don't know, if they know that they're responsible for leading the discussion, that'll be the 1 week that they read it, right? Yeah. So I make that assignment then. I think later on in the syllabus it says if you miss more than one discussion, you fail the class. It's my attendance policy. I mean, we live in a universe of choices. If you choose to stay here, this is what we're going to do. Usually, there's some very shy ones. Usually, I will say, if you turn in a detailed outline, you can get partial credit for participation that time. That way I have a sense at least if they didn't read it, they at least know enough to make an outline. And they were able, if they couldn't get over their shyness, they could have participated in this. I went back, we read this one, Beak of the Finch, which won the Pulitzer Prize, 20 years ago. We read this one probably for 6 or 7 years. And generally, it's until I get tired of it, but there's some that they continue to get enough out of that it's worth continuing. Wonderful Life, I think the last time we read that was probably 97 or 98, and I brought that one back this year. They're all pretty good. I read them all before we started the class, and then I reread them with them, and each year I'm not going to choose one that I don't like. It's a great thing to do. And my footing on a lot of the history of life topics is very strong where it was weaker. And I like that.
Concerning these books, there's probably a textbook for the class.
Yeah.
And then these books are, one book alone is assigned for a week or a month for discussion?
They read 2 over the course of the semester.
2 weeks.
So when we have these meetings, part of it is for us to talk about content, and the other part is to talk about the writing. Bringing your listen, be prepared. Come to the meeting ready. Bring your notes. Bring your books, whether they're these outside reading books or the textbook. But you need to bring whatever basic material you have. This is, that's your portal to the Word. And what you have already written on sheets of paper. Sometimes they are so cute. They bring in their laptop and I didn't print it out, but you can read it right here. No, I don't think so. I think you can print it out. We can talk about something. I can't write on the computer screen, but I'm very handy. I can write on a piece of paper. We can do something with that. Generally, the schedule I would like to do 1 a week, 15 minutes a week for 3 weeks. We should be able to come up with a thesis statement and an outline the first week. And it may change, and I'll tell you, if I've learned anything from doing this, I've learned how to shape my own writing with thesis statements in a way I never did before. And then the second meeting, we should work on those body paragraphs and that they're constructed in this particular way. And the references. And then I always teach them, you write the introduction last because you don't know what you're going to write about until you're finished, right? They all want to write the introduction first, and none of them have a clue before they finish writing what their paper's about. And then this, maybe I should have put that in bold. But that's the ideal scheme, and it doesn't always work that way, but that's the way we like to do it. I post a schedule on my door. I probably post 2 weeks at a time. I'm not as respectful of my time. I think these days are gone too. That I will, there's 5 days on each of these, and maybe some days are completely blocked out because I'm doing field work or I'm doing something else. But generally, there's plenty of. It won't be a problem that you couldn't find to do this, and so they have a chance to sign in. It's a little bothersome when they scratch out, and they scratch out the minute of. If you notice, probably right about here, you can see some lines through on Monday. So Monday at 9 o'clock, I drew this line through here. I don't run a 7-Eleven. You can't come in anytime you want and get whatever it is you want. I'm sorry, you can't do that. So I think I should be able to know what my schedule is for the day by 9 o'clock in the morning. We're going to let you go in a minute. And sometimes I do it the morning of, and sometimes I do it the afternoon of, but I don't have a problem with that. I keep all these and staple them together. So if anybody says you weren't available, how could I be more available? I really don't know how. I don't know who gets credit for introducing me to minimal marketing, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. I don't need to line edit what any 18-year-old writes. It turns out my time is worth more than that. My time is worth more than line editing what a 21-year-old or 40-year-old writes too, right? We have Academic Success Center with the writing room, and there are people that can recognize what an incomplete sentence is and what a misplaced participial phrase. Did I say that right? Or one of these things. I mean, they've got professional training and they can do that. I don't need to do that. The way you do minimal marketing, and this is a quick, easy, simple paper to read. It's just 3 pages. You get a highlighter. And as you read the paper, when you read something that's an incomplete sentence or misspelling or you name it, just aside, you do your little highlighter spot there. At the end of that, I go through and count the number of those that I've got. I stop counting at 10. If there's more than 10 of those, I quit counting at 10. And you'll see what happens with it in a minute. Then, after you've done that, read it again, just for the content. And you're not busy trying to correct, because Jim Kaufman said this a long time ago when he retired. He's like, you stand in the bathroom and you read the stall wall, right? And you're correcting what's on the stall wall. That part of your life is over. After you put those little spots on the side of the page, you're not doing that anymore. All you're doing is reading for the content, that they understood what they were doing, right? You make comments and you write a full paragraph. And I think it's very important with the fragile egos that I work with to keep it positive, right? So, I give them a rubric and I print this sheet out for them. And I put their name at the top, and I put what paper number it is, and I put the date, generally, that I give it back to them, because I think they got a week to turn it back to me. And I've got some very simple questions in my rubric that I do. If they go to the paper is worth 40 points. If they go to one meeting, they get 3 points. If they go to 2 meetings, they get 6 points. If they go to all 3 meetings, they get 10 points. That's a quarter of their paper grade just to come to the meeting. Grammatical writing errors, stop counting at 10. So I'll write down that little number that I counted up, and I subtract from 10. Sometimes it's hard for me to explain things that sort of seem simple. But, there's many as 10 points I will subtract for that. So you could get 10 there, You get 10 points if there are not any of those errors. I would subtract the number of little spots that I put on the side of the page so it could go down to 0. But half of the grade on the paper is just if you came to the meeting and you wrote in complete sentences with no misspellings and it was properly written, right? And then the other half of the points follow from that rubric right there. And then I have a chance to talk about their understanding about the content here. I think that's really, I like it. It works for me. What I'm going to add this coming spring is there a clearly identified thesis, because sometimes there's not, is treatment in those different paragraphs, parallel and consistent. This is a hard one for them. Is the paper driven by observations, which is what I always want, or is it driven by theory or interpretations? I always stress to them, let's start with what everyone will agree on, what everyone can observe and agree on. I don't know how I'm going to, add and when I'm going to lose and subtract. Then if it's dry or smooth, that's another thing that I'm going to put in. And I put in bold here this comments, just because they're not all bummed out that I, have put red all over their paper. That the comments that I have about the substance of their paper, the scientific content of their paper, the quality of their reasoning is all right here. And I've given them a whole paragraph, and it's not confused with a bunch of stuff about complete sentences. For many years, since I think 89 or 90, I've kept a journal. I've written in a notebook for a very long time. And if we weren't pressed on time, I would tell you the reason why I started. This just goes back to 98. This is most of the books back to 98. And I usually fill 2 in a year. And it turns out that's been an important practice for me. And I think if it's good enough for me, it might be good enough for students too. So I started a journal component to my class as well. This was a book I thought was helpful. And in particular, there's a meta aspect to this. And it's important for them to reflect on what it is that they did learn. I mean, it's important for them to write down some content things, right? Some facts and interpretations and things like that. But it turns out in their processing, in their brain, it's important for them to write what they think it is, what they think about what they learned. There are so many challenging concepts in this class that turns out to be particularly important. And they do a lot of processing in their brain when they do that. I do a variety of techniques. I'll show you examples, maybe not of all of these, but of some of these in the next couple of minutes. This has been a good thing to do. I'm not at my final place on this, but I'm very happy with it. They're required to do at least 2 a week. I try to give them at least 1 in class or lab each week. I've used them to start the book discussions. I realized as I prepared this that I'm missing an opportunity. If I gave them 10 minutes to write at the end of one of those book discussions, they could crystallize some of what they learned then. That would be a really good thing to do. And if I hadn't prepared this presentation, I would have not realized I'd done this. Not formal writing. A rule of the journal is that it's for you. It's private and it's yours. I tell them at the beginning, and it's probably written on the second page of that syllabus. It's nice to see. I tell them this is a private document, but I don't want to say evaluate it, but for you to get credit for it, I need to be able to read it at least once. There have been more than a few times that I wish I hadn't read what was written in that journal. What people will write down today, I don't think I would write down some of the things and you know, on the free writing, or that was on the previous thing, free writing, what's important is that when I say go, you start. And you don't stop until the 5 minutes is up, right? And I thought, I don't care what you write. I mean, it's more important for them to see that they can write and they can use it as a way to brainstorm or think. But there have been some things that I read that were really inappropriate in almost any school setting. And I'll just leave it. So, a list, that's pretty simple. And I think you see the date on this, 118. That's somewhere in the first week. I said, write down a list of terms that you learned yesterday. Well, that's a pretty long list. I think their brain was full when they left. I think they got their money's worth. This is an interesting technique. And I'm not, listen, you get a little too close a view at some people's thoughts sometimes. In this column here, so a student will work in a pair, and they'll each write a column here these are the facts. In the reading that we just did, what are the facts? What does everybody agree on in the assigned reading? What's your response to that material? And then one hands his or her journal to the other one, and they exchange. And based on these facts as written down, this response is written down, what was the partner's response to that? And then what questions do you have after doing that? And to do this before a discussion, neither of them wants to look silly in front of the other one and not look like they're prepared for the discussion, right? They both have an incentive to be prepared for that. They've already talked about it. They see that there's some common ground they have with another student, and they're more willing to participate in the discussion, which I think is very valuable. So generally, you know, a lot of times either they'll flag for themselves or I'll flag a journal entry in their notebooks just with a little bit of highlighter. And this was, this was an entry and it was really not too bad. There's something here that's not quite right. I thought what the student wrote here was pretty good. They are just thinking and processing. And you know what? I'm concerned that they keep up the journal. I'm not sitting in judgment on what they write, how they think, how they're processing this. This was a fun one. When we got to, there was an opportunity that we had to, when we surveyed the whole Mesozoic and the history of the dinosaurs in the Mesozoic, I said, when in the Mesozoic would you like to be? So you could see, what would you like to see in the history of the dinosaurs? And the range and variety of responses was really pretty good on that. They wrote it for themselves. They didn't write it for me. I didn't see this, gosh, for another 4 weeks. But it was a thoughtful thing. I liked it. Okay, on this gold piece of paper, on the other side of this, you have to learn the time scale in the class. And so they wrote the time scale, and on the other side, I had them flip it over. And I said, write a definition of natural selection or evolution by natural selection, and then draw a couple pictures. believe it or not, this is really a couple of the better drawings. These are pretty rank. But this was a helpful thing to do, and then I gave them a glue stick. I didn't take this up as a quiz, the time scale as a quiz. I gave them a glue stick, and I said, you can just paste this in your notebook as a journal entry for today. This is one that a student did at home after we did a lab in how to, we took a field trip to collect fossils. When we came back the next week, they used fossils to date different rock sequences. And I was impressed. After the lab, the student wrote this. They wrote about the difficulty in finding the fossils, the difficulty in identifying them, and then how they used the range of each of these fossils to calculate the age. And it was clear to me from doing this that the students really had learned something from it. This little page doesn't look like much, but this is a pretty sophisticated, the concepts on this page are pretty sophisticated. And I couldn't tell you right now who wrote this one, Mike. There's a pretty good chance it was a first-year student. The level of understanding, whether somebody's working from their notes as they did this or not, I was very impressed. Okay, how I keep track of these things, there's a regular spreadsheet that I'm keeping track of the grades, and then this part right here, and really, it's just taped or pasted into my notebook. This is their appointment schedule for different weeks. And I just, when they came in, I wrote down the time, the day of the week and the time they were in. It's already written down, but as they come to see me, I just write it down too. This is for their journal entries, and so if you have 2 a week, you can just do a single line if it's one entry and then a double, a plus sign. They did 2 entries. I guess those big lime green stripes are people who decide this wasn't for them. This is, I mentioned a few minutes ago, I really do think the drawings are important. And I really do think it's great if a student wants to capture something with their phone and take a picture of it. I think it's great for them to do that. And they can recapitulate all this at home. I said partly a joke. If I'm disappointed with something, it's probably the threaded discussion. It's not really a train wreck, but sometimes it feels like it. By the way, this is in Langley. This is September 1st, 1886. This is when the Charleston earthquake came, August 31st, 1886. This train just above Langley spilled off the track. That's sort of interesting. Threaded discussion, how I handled that on Blackboard is, and another friend taught me this, not at USC Aiken. She said, well, I said what I wanted that every student should be responsible for, initiating 2 threads and responding to 3. And I said, you should probably do at least 1 each month. And so if you've got 4 months and you've got 5 of these things, I just didn't want everybody piling in at the end of the time. And I'll get you in 1 second, Henry. I asked my friend how she managed it. And she said, it has to be points to do it. And if you participate in this, you earn the points, and if you don't, you won't. I thought the threaded discussion would be a place where people who were too shy to say something in class would say something on the computer. Well, sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. The problem with me is I say initiate a substantive thread and respond, a meaningful response. It needs to be more than a sentence, and it's been very hard to coax that out of them. If you have a suggestion to make on this, I'd be very interested to hear it. Dr. Gurr, I think you had something.
Yeah, apparently these threaded discussions about class and email type of thing.
They're on Blackboard.
On Blackboard, yes.
Conclusion. Turns out, I mean, this is the last, like, real content-related slide. It was very liberating to me to change my syllabus. It opened up a lot of doors for me. The papers, we talked about the choice of topics, we talked about meetings, we talked about minimal marking, we talked about a rubric. We talked about, as I grade these things, I want to focus my comments on content, and I wanted to give them an opportunity to rewrite it. In the time that I would have spent testing in the class, I want to do something creative and interactive with them, and we discuss books, and students lead the discussion, and they earn significant points doing that. I'm a believer in this, even if I do have to read some inappropriate material, I can just skip over it. I think it's a life skill. I think you can train yourself doing this, and it can be, it can help you be more productive. We talked a little bit about this, and we said to get over it. Okay, we've almost left the formal content of this. This is a dinosaur jaw, that's not 100% correct, that was recovered beneath Savannah Riverside in '96 as part of the team I worked with. I don't know how many of you knew that there was a dinosaur site so very close to us. When Miss Dennis first saw it, have you ever seen this, Joe? It's headed to the Smithsonian since it was found on a federal reservation. It's headed to the Smithsonian when the people at Columbia University finish with it. When Miss Dennis first saw this, she said, "How big is that?" And I have to tell you, this is recovered from core. The core is probably, I don't know, 4 inches in diameter. And a friend of mine was cutting it with a rock saw. He made one cut. He picked it up and he moved the saw over and he made the second cut. And it came away. You see this jaw. And he felt very dumb after he had done that. And this horizon must be full of these things. And when Miss Dennis saw it, she said, "How big is that?" And I told her it was from core. Really, the jaw is just about so big, as big as the end of your finger. These are some of the dinosaurs. These are some of the animals that went extinct to give rise to the true dinosaurs, which came up at the beginning of the Jurassic. I just think that's fun.
Were the teeth?
Yeah.
Above the opposite side of the jaw.
Yeah, I mean, you see them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it looks bloodthirsty. I like that picture a lot. It shows a couple unconformities in the Grand Canyon. And it's a really interesting spot. I want to speak to this close by speaking to this topic of discouragement. Is that right? Is that a word, discouragement?
It's missionary work, in my opinion.
Well,
You don't expect applause.
My experience of men, sorry about gender default imagery, I apologize. My experience of men has neither disposed me to think worse of them or indisposed to serve them, nor in spite of failures which I lament, of errors which I now see and acknowledge, or of the present aspect of affairs, do I despair of the future. This is not bad. The truth is this: the march of providence is so slow, and our desires so impatient, the work of progress so immense, and our means of aiding it so feeble. The life of humanity is so long, that of the individual so brief, that we often only see the ebb of the advancing wave and are thus discouraged. It's history that teaches us to hope. That's a pretty good Robert E. Lee quote, I think. And so it is missionary work. And certainly you will be discouraged without that passion and enthusiasm we talked about. I mean, you have to be excited about it